Alright, so as we move into the lesson about solving quadrilaterals, just a few reminders. Read through these different characteristics that we've talked about a parallelogram, a rectangle, a rhombus, and a square. You also need to be responsible for kites and trapezoids, but we're going to just go through the process of using these characteristics to solve. Here's some guiding questions if you need some help kind of thinking through these processes. This is what I go through when I solve these. I start with what's my task? What's it asking me to do? What shape is given? So is it a square? Is it a parallelogram? Then what info is given? So when I look at the diagram or when I look at the words, what information is given? Are we talking about sides, diagonals, or angles? And then I'm going to go back to knowing that I focused in on they gave me angles. What do I know about the angles of my given shape? And then what equation can I write? And then did I solve my task? Because sometimes it's going to ask you to solve for x. Sometimes it'll ask you to find the length of a line segment or an angle. All right, let's get started. All right, so in this first example, it says given that the figure is a parallelogram, solve for A. So what is my task? My task is to solve for A. So I'm just finding the variable value. And then my second question is, what shape is given? All right, well, we're talking about a parallelogram. So now, what info is given? Well, when I look at this, I see that they're talking about the angles of that parallelogram. So what do I know about the angles of my shape? Well, when I think about a parallelogram, I know that the consecutive angles are supplementary, and I also know that both pairs of opposite angles are congruent. So when I look at this information, I see that this angle is 6a plus 10 and this angle is 130, and those are opposite angles, so those are congruent. So what equation can I write? Well, I can say if they're congruent, then I can set up that they're equal. So I have 6a plus 10 equals 130, so I'm going to go ahead and solve that out. So when I solved it, I got a equals 20, and the task is to solve for a. So did I solve for my task? Yes, I did. I found that a is 20. All right, so in this next example, given that the figure is a parallelogram, the task is to solve for x. All right, so what is my task? Solve for x. And then what shape is given? I know it's a parallelogram. And then what info is given? So when I look at this, I see that I'm given the length of DC and the length of AB. I'm also given the angle DCA is congruent to BAC. So I'm given something about angles and something about side lengths. So what do I know about the side lengths of a parallelogram and the angles of a parallelogram? Well, these are actually the angles of the diagonals, so that's really not going to help me. But what do I know about the side lengths of a parallelogram? I know that the opposite sides are congruent. So I can go ahead and write that equation. So go ahead and pause the video and write the equation. So I got 5x minus 8 equals 2x plus 7. Go ahead and pause the video and solve that out. Alright, so I found that x is 5, and my final question is, did I solve my task? It asked me to solve for x, and I found that x is 5. Alright, so in this one it says, given that the figure is a rectangle, solve for y. So the first question is, what is my task? And my task is to solve for y. And then, what shape? So we're talking about a rectangle. All right, what info is given? So when I look at this, I see that we're talking about pieces of a rectangle's diagonals. So what do I know about the diagonals of a rectangle? Well, I know that the diagonals of a rectangle bisect each other. So I know that E, whatever this point, is going to be equal to G to that point, and the same with D to that point and F to that point. But these are on different diagonals, so that's not going to help me. I know that in a rectangle, the diagonals are congruent, so I know that EG is congruent to DF. So I'm actually going to use kind of both of those combinations of information. So if EG is congruent to DF, and I know that this point bisects, so DF is going to be split in half here, and EG is split in half here. So if they're congruent, if they're the same length, and I split them in half, then this segment is going to be the same length as this segment. So what equation can I write? Well, I can say that 5y plus 3 is equal to 7y minus 5. Go ahead and pause the video and solve that equation. So I got that y equals 4. And the question, my final question is, what did I solve for my task? And the task was to solve for y, and I did. So hopefully you were able to say that 4x plus 20 plus x minus 10 equals 180. If you got that, go ahead and pause the video and solve it. Alright, when I solved it out, I ended up with x equals 34, and my task was to find x, so I did. Alright, this next example, given that the figure is a rhombus, solve for x and y, and then find DA or DB and AC. Alright, so my first question is, what is my task? Well, I actually kind of have a lot going on here. I need to solve for x and y, and then I also need to find DB and AC. Alright, my next question that I ask myself is, what shape? So I see that we're talking about a rhombus, and then what info is given? So when I look at this, I see that they're giving me something about the diagonals. So what do I know about the diagonals of a rhombus? All right, well, I know that the diagonals bisect each other. I also know that the diagonals are perpendicular and that they bisect opposite angles. So when I think about those three things, there's really nothing about angle measures. So I'm not really going to deal with anything in the right angle. But I do see that they bisect each other. So this is going to be congruent to this, and this is going to be congruent to this. So what equation can I write? Well, I can say that y minus 1 equals 2y minus 7, and I can say that 2x is equal to 4. So go ahead and pause the video and solve those two equations. So you should have found that x is 2 and y is 6. So go ahead and pause the video and find DB and AC. Alright, so I found that DB is made up of 2x plus 4, so 2x plus 4, and I know that x is 2, so I just plug that in, and 2 times 2 is 4, plus 4 is 8. And then AC is made up of y minus 1 plus 2y minus 7. So y is 6, so I said 6 minus 1 plus 2 times 6 minus 7, and that gives me 10. Alright, in this next example, find x in the following parallelogram if the perimeter of the figure is 162. Alright, so what is the task? Well, the task is to find x. Alright, what is the shape? Well, I see that the shape is a parallelogram, and what info is given? Alright, well, I'm given one length here, and I'm given the width here. And so what do I know about the sides? Those are sides. So what do I know about the sides of a parallelogram? Well, I know that the opposite sides are parallel, but I also know that the opposite sides are congruent. So I know that this side is congruent to this side, and that this side is congruent to this side. So what equation can I write? Well, if we're talking about the perimeter of the figure being 162, that means that this side plus this side plus this side plus this side equals 162. So if this side is 3x minus 3, well, then this side also has to be 3x minus 3. And if this side is 2x plus 9, this side also has to be 2x plus 9. So I can either write an equation that says 3x plus 3 plus 2x plus 9 plus 3x minus 3, plus 2x plus 9 equals 162. Or I can use my knowledge that if there's two of these, that's the same as 2 times 2x plus 9 plus 2 times 3x minus 3, because I see there are two 2x plus 9s and there are two 3x minus 3s. So go ahead and pause the video and solve this out. So I ended up with x is 15, and my final question is, did I solve for my task? My task was to find x, and I got x is 15. Alright, so the next one says, given the following rhombus, solve for x and y. So what is my task? Solve for x and y. What shape am I given? A rhombus. Alright, and then what information is given? So when I look at this, I see that we're talking about the angles of a rhombus. So what do I know about the angles of a rhombus? Well, I know that all consecutive angles are supplementary. I know that both pairs of opposite angles are congruent, and that is all that I know. So I know that these angles are supplementary, I know that these angles are supplementary, and I also know that these angles are congruent and these angles are congruent. So there's multiple ways that I could attack this problem. So I'd like you to pause the video and see if you can write two equations that will help you solve this problem. So hopefully you were able to recognize that 3y and 123 are congruent because those opposite angles are congruent to each other. So this is equal to this. And also that you were able to recognize that 2x minus 5 equals 1 plus 123 equals 180 because those consecutive angles are supplementary. Now, you could have solved this one for y and then put these two equal to 180. Once you know what y is, but this is the easier route. So go ahead and pause the video and solve for x and y. So I got that y is 41 and x is 31, and my final question is, did I solve for my task? It was to find x and y, so yes I did. Alright, so the next question, given the following parallelogram, solve for a, b, x, and y. So what's my task? It's to solve for a, b, x, and y. What shape is given? I'm given that it's a parallelogram. All right, and then the question is, what information is given? All right, well, there's a lot of information given. So I'm given some information about angles, and I'm given the diagonal. I'm also given side lengths. So let's go ahead and start kind of narrowing it down. So what do I know about, let's start with the sides. What do I know about the sides of a parallelogram? Well, I know that opposite sides are congruent. So I can say that this side is congruent to this side and that this side is congruent to this side. So go ahead and pause the video and see if you can write an equation for A and B. Hopefully you were able to see that A is just 20. That was nice and easy. And that 2B equals 28 because those opposite sides are congruent. So when I solve for B, I get that B is 14. Alright, so let's go ahead and attack these angles. So, I know that in a parallelogram, what do I know about the angles? Well, I know that the opposite angles are congruent, so I know that this whole angle is going to be congruent to this whole angle, and this angle is going to be congruent to 4x, but that doesn't really tell me much. I also know that all consecutive angles are supplementary. So I know that 4x and this angle right here are 180. This angle, but I'm still missing this piece, so that angle is not going to be any good to me. This angle and 4x, oh, I do know this whole angle is 70 and 42, and this angle is 4x. So this angle plus this angle are supplementary. So let's go ahead and write that equation. So I was able to say that 70 plus 42, because that makes up that whole angle, plus this consecutive angle of 4x is supplementary, so that equals 180. So when I solve that out, I end up with x is 17. All right, so let's see how we can figure out y. Well, I noticed, I'm going to go ahead and plug in 17 for x, because I do know what that is. So 4 times 17 is 68. So I do know that this angle right here is 68 degrees. Let's see what else. So I need to somehow get down here. Well, I noticed this triangle right here. So I'm just going to kind of draw that out. this triangle right here, I know two of the angles, because I know this is 70, and I know that if this is a parallelogram, opposite angles are congruent. So if this is 68 degrees, then this too is going to be 68 degrees. And then I know that this is 3y. So I can use the interior angle, or the triangle sum theorem, to find out y. So go ahead and pause the video and see if you can write the correct equation. So hopefully you were able to see that 70 plus 68 plus 3y is 180, because the interior angles of a triangle add up to 180. So go ahead and pause the video and solve for y. So when I solved it out, I got 14. So then my final question is, did I solve for my task, or did I answer all parts? Find A, found it. Find B, got it. X and Y, yes. Now, I do want to point out that you could have solved for y a little differently. Some of you might have recognized a parallelogram has opposite sides that are parallel. So if this side is parallel to this side, then this would be a transversal, making these two alternate interior angles. So you could have gone straight to 3y equals 42 and solved it that way. All right. Given the following parallelogram, if AB equals 3x minus 1, CD equals 7x minus 9, AE equals 3y plus 4, and EC is 10x plus 2, solve for x and y. So first question, what's my task? I need to solve for x and y. What shape is given? Well, I see it's a parallelogram. And then what information is given? So let's go ahead and write in what I know. So I know that AB is 3x minus 1. I also know that CD is 7x minus 9. All right, and AE is 3y plus 4. And EC is 10x plus 2. All right, so what am I given in this drawing? Well, I'm given something with diagonals and then also something with sides, opposite sides specifically. So what do I know about the opposite sides of a parallelogram? Well, I know that both sets of opposite sides are congruent. So I can say that 7x minus 9 is going to be congruent to 3x minus 1. So what equation can I write? I can say that 3x minus 1 is equal to 7x minus 9 because those opposite sides are congruent. And then I also know the diagonals. So when I think about what do I know about the diagonals of a parallelogram, I know that they bisect each other. So the second thing I can conclude is that AE is going to be congruent to EC. So the equation I can write there is 3y plus 4 is equal to 10x plus 2. So I'm going to go ahead and solve those out. So when I solve them out, I end up with x is 2. And then once I found x, because I have two variables in this equation over here, so I can't solve that, I had to plug 2 in for x. And so I got 20 plus 2. And when I solved that out, I ended up with y equals 6. All right, the final question of these notes is if QR equals 2y plus 3, RS is 5x plus 1, and PQ is 5y, my task is to solve for x and y in the given rhombus. So what shape am I given? It's a rhombus. So what information is given? Let's go ahead and write in what we know. All right, so I see that I'm given a bunch of information about sides. So what do I know about the sides of a rhombus? Well, I know that opposite sides are congruent, opposite sides are parallel, but what's special about a rhombus is that all sides are congruent. So I can go ahead and say that this side is congruent to this side, is congruent to this side, is congruent to this side. So when I look at my expressions, I have a y here, and an x here. So I could say that those are equal, but then I would have I would have an x and a y. So I'm going to go ahead and say that these are equal, and I can say that because I know all sides of a rhombus are congruent. So I get the equation 5y equals 2y plus 3. So when I solve that out, I end up with y is 1. So I can go about this a couple different ways. If I know all sides are congruent, then I could essentially go back and put that 1 into the y, and I could end up with every side is going to be 5 times 1, which is just 5. So I can say this side is 5, this side is 5, this side is 5, this side is 5. So if this side specifically is 5, I could say that 5x plus 1 equals 5, because this is 5x plus 1, but I also know the length of the side is 5, and when I solve that out, I end up with the fraction y equals 4/5. All right, so what I want you to do is I want you to pause and I want you to think about what is a summary of what we've done today. What are the steps? What are the things that you need to remember? What are your be sure to statements? What are things that you're going to need to remind yourself of when you look at this? And I have one final thing I want you to think about before you move into the task card activity, is I want you to remember a couple things. Because these task cards are a little bit more difficult than these examples, but it's the same process. So I want you to keep in mind that if I'm given a rhombus or a square, remember that the diagonals are perpendicular. So those are right angles. And specifically, when I draw that right angle in, I now have a right triangle. So if I knew that this side was 2 and this side was 5, and I was asking for this side, I can use the Pythagorean theorem to find that side because I know the diagonals of a rhombus are perpendicular. So I could say 5 squared plus 2 squared equals x squared. So be looking for, do I have a right angle that I can use the Pythagorean theorem? Also, remember the triangle sum theorem. So remember things like if I had a rectangle and I knew that this was 62 degrees, I'm solving for x, and I know that this angle right here is 47 degrees. Well, I know that a rectangle, opposite sides are parallel. So if this angle is 47, then the alternate interior angles tell me that this is also 47. And when I look at this, I see that I have a triangle right here, and the triangle sum theorem says 47 plus 62 plus x equals 180, and I could solve that out. So those are just a couple of clues as you're working through. Some of these examples are pretty tricky, but go ahead and mark up the text, write in what you know, see if you can write an equation, and figure it out. Good luck.